Charles met them in the study, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cool. He looked smaller in daylight, the grief less theatrical, more private. "Tell me everything again," he said. He didn't ask. He offered himself to the timeline. Jack sat opposite him, fingers steepled. "From the moment you locked the gallery last night." Charles recited it, polite, trained sentences, times punctuated with exact minutes. He'd signed for the last inspection. He'd closed the private wing at 9:30. The dinner upstairs had run long. Staff rotated. He'd checked the display at 10 o'clock and again at 11:45. The crown was in place. He'd gone to bed, woken to find the case smashed by midnight. Ava watched him closely. "You mentioned a private safe during the initial statement. Who else knows about it?" Charles hesitated. "Only family. Only those who grew up here. It was meant to be private, kept away after my father passed. I only showed it to those I trusted." Jack's eyes didn't flicker. "Who did you trust?" "Julian. Louis. My lawyer briefly. Not Isabella. Not Marie." He swallowed. "There were family meetings. People know family's secrets. They float like ghosts. But ledger details, the ledger itself was hidden. A tiny compartment behind the crown stand. No one knew, except those who grew up in the house." Ava's hand brushed the edge of the table. "And you didn't notice anything missing until?" "Until the crown was out." Charles's jaw worked. The crown being gone was a shock. "When I found it in the safe, I assumed someone was trying to scare me. To distract." Jack stared at him. "Who had access to the safe code?" Charles looked down. "Not many. I always assumed family. But codes change. I don't know." A pause settled. Small but heavy. Ava stood, reaching for her notebook. "We're going to review security again. And your brother's phone records." Charles's face tightened. An emotion that didn't quite reach anger. "Julian would never." Jack held up a hand. "We're looking at facts, not feelings." They left him to move through the rooms again. The gallery felt smaller in daylight, its shadows shorter. Jack and Ava split their tasks without needing to say so. Ava to the security office, Jack to Julian's last known movements, both watching Whiskey and Cypher like second detectives. At the security room, monitors filled the wall. The lead tech, a woman named Mireille, worked with precision, fingers moving across keys like a pianist. "We pulled the feeds," she said. "But there's a gap." "How long?" Ava asked. Mireille tapped a few keys and rewound the footage to the 2-minute black space. "Exactly 2 minutes. From 2:11 to 2:13 a.m. The frame returns as if nothing happened." Jack watched the freeze frame long enough to feel its absence. "Who has admin access to the recordings?" "Only the head of security and Mr. Dubois, when he's at the museum. But the system logs show a remote access event at 2:10 a.m. Someone logged in, made an edit, and the entry shows deleted afterward." Ava's eyes narrowed. "Deleted logs?" Mireille nodded. "It traces back to a user token assigned to a personal device. We can try to pull device identifiers, but the logs were scrubbed from the main server." Jack's voice was steady. "Pull everything you can. MAC addresses, IPs, time of last sync." Mireille moved quickly. "I'll send what I find to your secure line." Outside the security room, the air felt colder. Ava rubbed her arms. "That 2-minute gap, someone planned that. Not opportunistic." Jack watched the screen, thinking through movements. Who knew the timing? Who could guarantee those 2 minutes would be enough? Ava paused, then added, "Whoever could get in and out without leaving fingerprints or alarms. And who knew the crown's hiding place?" They went next to check Julian's last evening. The household staff provided small, rehearsed accounts. Julian had attended the dinner briefly. He'd helped Charles in the study. Then he popped into the gallery to adjust the lighting, according to one assistant. Another mentioned seeing Julian near the cloakroom. These were soft contradictions, harmless in isolation, but a pattern drew him closer. Jack sat across from the assistant who'd last seen Julian. Did anyone notice Julian handling anything unusual? A coat? A book? The woman shook her head. He held Charles's coat for a moment. He said, "We'll need to keep this dry, because of the rain." He joked about the city. He left with Mr. Charles to check the vault. Her eyes flicked to the floor. He came back alone. Whiskey nosed the hem of Julian's coat when Jack located it in the cloakroom. Jack's fingers brushed the fabric and noticed, faintly, a dark crease, like an old ink smudge, thin and almost wiped. He held it closer to his nose. The smell hit paper, a faint tang of ledger ink, old and oily. He didn't say anything out loud. Instead, he carried the coat to Ava. She took the sleeve between two fingers, turning it to the light. "Fresh," she murmured. Not fresh as in wet, but fresh as in recent contact. "Someone touched ledger pages tonight and then wore this." Jack's gaze went to the photograph on the wall. Family portraits through the years. Julian's face was absent in earlier frames. In one, a gap where his presence might have been. Ava remembered the photo falling yesterday. Cypher's nudge had revealed the absence. She traced a finger along the frame's edge. "He's not in the old photos." Jack folded his hands. Either he wasn't around, or someone removed him from memory. Ava's phone buzzed. A note from Mireille. Partial device ID recovered. The IP traced to an off-site location, a cafe's public terminal in Montparnasse. Someone had used a public network to mask the edit. Jack closed his eyes for a fraction of a beat. Planned, careful, and someone with access to family knowledge. Ava added quietly, "And the call logs? Did you get Charles's phone records?" Jack nodded. "Yes. There are deleted call entries between Julian and Charles the night before. Deleted from Julian's device." Ava's breath came out soft. He knew to scrub the trail. Jack looked toward the corridor where Julian's shoes had gone. "We need to ask him about that faint scratch near the vault hinge. He mentioned the latch last night. Casually, before anyone told us about the hidden compartment." Ava's eyes sharpened. When he said the latch had a faint scratch, Jack's voice tightened just enough to register. Someone with intimate knowledge. They arranged to speak with Julian together, but not before Ava pulled Charles aside. "Mr. Dubois, you said only family knew about the ledger." Charles nodded. "Yes. Who besides Julian might have known the crown hid something?" Charles met her eyes, then looked away. "My father mentioned the ledger once, but he was secretive. We weren't to touch it. Julian, he was raised elsewhere. He wasn't part of the household for many years." Ava's hand found the edge of the table. "Was Julian ever married? You mentioned he recently removed a ring." Charles frowned. "He wasn't. At least that's what I thought." Jack watched, the small micro-moment recorded quietly in his mind. Julian's tan line where a ring had been, the subtle tightening of his smile when Whiskey sniffed his coat, the deleted call logs, the ink smell on the sleeve, the CCTV gap. These were small things, tiny like threads. Alone, they meant little. Together, they started to form a pattern that tugged at the edges of the case. Outside, Paris carried on. Delivery bikes, shopkeepers sweeping, an old woman humming as she arranged flowers. Inside, the museum kept its secrets close, but the seams were loosening. Jack looked at Ava, then back toward the study where Julian waited. "We'll ask him directly, calmly, step by step." Ava tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a motion she did when thinking. "And we watch how he helps. Watch the kindness. It often hides the sharpest edges." They moved toward the study, a quiet purpose between them. Whiskey matched their pace, attentive and patient. Cypher watched from a windowsill as if judging their theater with a cat's infinite patience. Jack opened the study door. Julian's smile was already there, warm and waiting. "Detectives," he said gently. "I was hoping to speak with you." Jack closed the door behind them. Something small shifted in the room. Not loud, but definite. They sat across from Julian in the study while the late light thinned to evening. He kept his hands folded loosely on his lap, posture easy, smile measured. He had the look of someone who believed warmth deflected suspicion, the practiced charm of a man who'd learned how to mend perception. You said you were at Charles's side most of the night, Jack began. His voice was low, steady. You checked the display earlier, adjusted the lighting. Julian nodded, perfectly composed. Of course, the crown deserved better presentation. My brother cared about how people watched history. Ava watched him, one knee tucked under the other, hands relaxed on her notebook. Your phone records show deleted calls with Charles the night before the theft. Why delete them? Julian blinked once. Not quick enough to be nervous, not slow enough to be rehearsed. We argue sometimes. My calls with Charles are personal. I delete things I don't want in the headlines. Headlines? Jack's tone was flat. There aren't headlines about private family ledgers. Julian's smile tightened minutely. You're suggesting this was deliberate theft? That I would. Ava didn't let him finish. We have a 2-minute CCTV gap. Someone scrubbed logs. The edit traces back to a public terminal in Montparnasse. The device token we recovered points to a user connected to a device that synced with a phone registered to Julian Dubois. Julian's eyes narrowed for a heartbeat. Then, smoothly, any Parisian can use a public terminal. It's easy to be framed. Jack watched the micro-expression, the tiny lift at the corner of Julian's mouth, the habitual defense. Whiskey doesn't agree with that theory. Julian gave a soft laugh. And what does a dog know? Whiskey, lying on the rug, lifted his head and walked over. He sniffed Julian's coat at the sleeve, long and deliberate, then nudged his hand. Julian shifted away, almost imperceptibly. The dog thumped his tail and sat, eyes steady on Julian. Ava's pencil paused on her notebook. He keeps sniffing you, she said quietly. That's not random. Julian's hands flexed. He's a curious dog. A knock sounded at the door. A housekeeper appeared, breathless. Monsieur, an envelope fell behind that marble bust when the photographer dusted the mantel. It has, she swallowed. It has a scrap of paper. Looks old. Jack rose and took the envelope. Inside lay a torn corner of paper, thin, with the faint watermark of ledger pages and a smudge of dark ink the color of old accounting ink. The edges were fresh where it had been ripped. The scrap had a single line of handwriting in a practice script, a list reference, account DUB/17, C note. Jack's fingers closed around it. He smelled the paper without meaning to. Old ink, a faint metallic note, like money and paper pressed together for decades. Julian stood a millimeter quicker than necessary. How odd, he said, voice clipped. That must have been from the ledger when it was being cataloged years ago. Could fall out from anywhere. Ava folded the scrap between fingers. Someone planted it for you to find or something knocked it loose. Either way, it was here. Recently. Julian swallowed. The tan line on his left ring finger showed where a ring had been. He flexed his hand as if to rub it away. I had a ring, he admitted softly, too late. We were engaged. It didn't work out. Does that matter? It might, Jack said. It explains a ring mark. It also suggests change. People remove rings when they plan different lives. Julian opened his mouth, closed it. You're reading too much into jewelry. Ava's phone buzzed against her thigh. She glanced down, then looked back at Julian. Mireille recovered partial device identifiers, she said. The MAC registered to the scrub event matches a device that's synchronized with a cloud backup tied to a phone number registered 2 months ago under an alias. The billing address traces to a short-stay apartment under Julian's name a week ago. Julian's face shifted, not with panic, but with a mild displeasure. I travel for work and stay in apartments. It's normal. Jack's expression didn't change. So is deleting call logs. Julian inhaled, then let the breath out slowly. You're building a narrative. We build facts, Ava corrected. Facts are stubborn. The room hummed with a cautious silence. Julian watched Jack like a man observing a chess player considering a move. Did you remove anything from the gallery? Ava asked suddenly. No, Julian was quick. Why would I do that? I am family. Family who knows where a ledger would be hidden, Jack said. You mentioned the latch scratch last night before anyone told us about what was behind the crown. Julian's smile thinned. He answered like a man reciting history. I noticed everything about that room, small details. The hinge is old. The scratched. I said it because I saw it. Too convenient, Ava said simply. Julian stood and moved toward a window, hands behind his back. Outside, the Seine reflected a narrow slice of pale sky. A distant church bell tolled. When he turned back, he handed Jack an old photograph. Not the official portrait in the parlor, but a candid snapshot taken in summer sunlight. Family picnic. Charles and a slightly older boy by his side. Julian's image was not in that photo either. The gap showed like a missing tooth. Jack noticed but didn't comment. Ava did. He wasn't in many of the early pictures. Julian's face showed a flash of something that might have been resentment. It's complicated, he said. I was raised differently. That doesn't make me a thief. Jack's hand rested lightly on the scrap of paper. Someone staged the public robbery to distract from a private theft. You had reasons to resent family decisions. You had access to the safe. Your phone had deleted calls. You logged on through a public terminal around the edit window. You were in the house near the time of the theft. The ink on your coat matches ledger ink. Julian's mouth moved. Accusations are easy. We're not accusing you yet, Ava said. We're listing observations. Help us explain them. He inhaled and met Jack's eyes. For a fraction of a beat, something like fatigue crossed his face. Not guilt, not shame, but the exhausted weight of someone performing normalcy for too long. Why would I put the crown back in the safe? He asked. If I wanted to steal, why not keep it? Why stage everything else? Ava answered before Jack. Because the crown was never the target, she said. You know the ledger matters. The ledger exposes inheritance. Taking the ledger and staging a robbery that makes you look helpful is smart. You deflect attention, appear concerned, and the real theft disappears into the noise. Julian's eyes hardened. So you think I orchestrated my brother's humiliation? Ava's voice was calm. We know someone removed the ledger. We know someone scrubbed the footage. We know someone had knowledge of the hiding place. Whiskey nudged Julian's knee and looked up at him like he expected a small confession. Julian set his jaw, patted the dog, the motion practiced, controlled. A faint smile returned, but it didn't reach all the way. I would never harm Charles. Jack watched the microtells, the way he resisted anger but let small slivers of it show in gestures. We're not done yet. Julian inclined his head, placating. Of course, I'll cooperate fully. Outside, city lights blinked. Inside, the study held the smell of old paper and the quiet tension of a house where histories were being sifted. Ava closed her notebook slowly. We're going to confirm your whereabouts tonight and compare them with the apartment records and the cafe terminal footage. If anything doesn't match your statement, we'll bring you in again. Julian's smile returned, warmer, practiced. I understand. I'll wait. He left the room with perfect composure. As the door closed, Cypher, who had slipped in unnoticed, hopped onto the mantel and pawed at an old catalog. A single page fluttered to the floor, a printed inventory list with a penciled note and a date the ledger referenced. Ava picked it up, reading the penciled mark. Remove before audit. She looked up at Jack. Someone planned to hide something during an audit. Jack's gaze flicked to the hallway where Julian had gone. And someone used the crown as a stage. Whiskey lay back down inside. A long, soft sound. The house settled with small creaks. Ava's phone pinged again. A message from Mireille. An image of the cafe terminal footage. A silhouette at the keyboard. The angle didn't clearly show a face, but the coat was familiar, same cut and cuff as Julian's. Jack felt the pattern close in like a hand. He closed his notebook and said simply, We're not finished with anyone. Ava nodded. No theatrics, just facts. They walked out into the corridor together, methodical, patient, certain the threads would tighten. They left Julian's calm behind like a door closing on a room that still smelled of old paper. The corridor sighed with museum quiet. a sound like breathing through thin cloth. Outside, the city had emptied a little, shop shutters already pulled down. A boulangerie 2 blocks away left a warm glow. From its doorway came the soft scent of butter and warm bread. Ava paused, glanced at the shop, then back at Jack. "Croissant later?" she asked lightly. Jack only nodded. Later. They had threads to pull first. Ava sent a brief message to Mireille, asking for the cafe terminal footage again and a higher resolution pull on the silhouette. Mireille replied in a stream of quick French, which Ava skimmed and then translated softly for Jack. The silhouette's coat cuff matched the cut of Julian's coat, right down to a tiny embroidery at the hem. Not proof, but a narrowing circle. They split tasks. Jack would confront Louis again. The voicemail left a bitter taste in his mouth. It deserved digestion. Ava went to check Marie's phone records and the coat where the casino chip had been found. In the servant's kitchen, Louis claimed he needed fresh air. He was outside on a bench by the garden wall when Jack found him, coat collar turned up against a thin wind. "You left at 9, Jack said, standing a comfortable distance away. Louis looked at him, then away. "I said 9. But earlier you told Charles it was closer to 10. Louis's jaw worked. "We argued. I lost track of time." "You argued about ownership," Jack said. "And your voicemail has an angry edge. It complains about money, about control. That's fine. I understand business friction. What I don't understand is your insistence on leaving before 11 when multiple witnesses place you moving around the gallery later." Louis flinched. "I told you. I needed to meet someone. A broker. We were discussing investors. Things got heated. I left. I came back. I left again. For how long the second time?" Louis's breath went tight. "Not long. 10, 15 minutes. Jack kept his voice plain. "We have a recorded snippet of a heated argument. You changed your time under pressure." "Why?" "That's different from theft," Jack said. "Explain the voicemail. That's a little more than a business dispute. The threat in it." Louis's sound was half laugh, half anger. "A threat? People speak sharply when money's on the line. Charles is stubborn. So am I. That doesn't mean I broke in." Jack watched him. "People with threats make others do things." Louis's hand curled briefly. "Are you saying I hired someone?" "That I would." "No," Jack raised a palm. "Not yet. But you are under pressure. And people under pressure make mistakes. We'll keep checking your timeline." Louis stared at the stone of the wall, then shook his head as if clearing it. "I'll be available. Ask anything." Jack left him on the bench with his thoughts. Louis's face was set like stone and also like someone trying to keep a facade from cracking. Meanwhile, Ava sat at a small desk in a back office, the late sunlight falling in a long bar across the table. She scrolled through Marie's messages. There were texts to a number saved under a different name, a sporadic string of requests for money, the language perfunctory. She tapped the number into a search and got nothing public. The chip found in Charles's coat had fingerprints that didn't match Marie's. They matched no one in the house. She phoned the casino. A woman answered, voice clipped. "Yes, we found a chip removed from your patron's account?" Ava explained the situation and asked if the casino could confirm whether the chip in Charles's coat had been used recently. "Not in our system," the woman said. "But the chip could be generic. We can check table assignments." An hour later, coffee gone cold on the desk, Ava got a call. The chip was from the casino, but the fingerprint didn't match Marie's prints on file. The chip's surface carried an extra smear of ink, old ledger ink traces. Somebody had handled ledger pages and then planted the chip. Ava rubbed her forehead and smiled thinly. "Frame, that's getting more intentional." She grabbed her coat, found Jack in the garden, and handed him the news. He read it, expression not changing much, but his eyes narrowed. "Planted to point to Marie." "Exactly. Fake frame. Someone wanted Marie to look guilty. Someone who knew she'd be an easy mark." They went back inside together. Cypher was asleep on Ava's jacket in a hallway niche when they passed. He opened one eye, blinked, and turned back to sleep. The cat's indifference felt like a small comfort. At the forensic lab on the museum's lower floor, Mireille and a tech were waiting with a thin folder. "We ran the coat fabric under magnification," Mireille said. "There are faint ink smears that match the chemistry profile of the ledger ink. We also lifted a partial print, too smudged to ID. But we pulled a swab from the same sleeve and forwarded it for DNA." Jack pocketed the empty report like a card left on the table. "And," Mireille tapped the report again. "The DNA came back inconclusive, mixed sample. But the smear's pattern suggests someone wiped the sleeve afterward. They tried to remove prints. Someone knew what they were doing." Jack stared at the little line of typed words like a map. "Someone with experience in moving things quietly." They received another message from Mireille. The cafe terminal footage had a slightly clearer frame, the silhouette's wrist, a faint ring tan, and a small abrasion on the hand. Ava looked at the image and then to Jack. Ring tan. Abrasion. Jack's mind went to Julian, the tan line, the ring he'd removed. Could someone else have similar marks? Possibly. The abrasion suggested recent manual work, a lock, a tool, something metal. They compiled the pattern. Someone scrubbed security logs from a public terminal. Someone planted a casino chip on Charles's coat. Someone left an old ledger fragment in the study. Someone's sleeves bore ledger ink. And multiple people had motive: Marie for debt, Louis for control, Isabella for resentment, Julian for exclusion. Ava sat on a bench in the gallery, watching Whiskey patrol the empty cases like a small, determined guard. Her phone buzzed. Isabella had requested to meet. She wanted to speak with Jack and Ava, to clear the air. Ava frowned. Isabella's tone had been too controlled from the start. Wanting to clear the air could mean fear or artful preemption. Jack came to sit beside her. "We pull each thread, tighten them. We don't rush to tie anyone down until the weave is clear." Ava watched his profile in the half-light. He would not rush. He never did. The quiet in him had weight. It made the people around him lean closer without meaning to. Whiskey nosed Julian's abandoned scarf on a table and then pawed at the hem. A tiny black fleck of ink came away on his paw. Whiskey licked it and then glanced at Jack, like he was delivering an odd report. Jack saw the fleck, then the way Julian had shifted in the study when questioned earlier. He cataloged the motions. The tan line, the deleted calls, the cafe terminal, the ink smears, the planted chip, the CCTV gap, exactly 2 minutes. A pattern existed here, tight, patient, practiced. Ava closed her eyes for a fraction. "Someone planned every layer," she said softly. "And they knew how we would look. They wanted that." Jack's reply was a murmur. "Then we learn who needed the ledger gone and who knew enough to hide it." They stood together, small and steady in the long gallery, watching history hold its breath. They let the afternoon thin toward evening before circling back through the rooms again. The museum lights were warmer now, hugging the exhibits with amber halos. Outside, the sky had the soft, gray blue of a Parisian dusk. A distant church bell counted the hour. Jack moved slowly, not because he had nowhere to go, but because moving slowly gave him time to watch the edges of people's reactions. Ava matched his pace, watching him watch. Isabella asked to meet in the study. She arrived with a scarf folded over one arm and a steady step that never looked like it had been hurried. Her face was a precise mask of civility, but the thinness of it suggested the mask was stretched. She sat where the light caught the angles of her cheekbones and did not make small talk. Control, always control. "Mr. Du Bois," she said, inclining her head toward Charles, who was elsewhere with a solicitor. "You suspect a family betrayal." Ava's tone was plain. "We suspect someone with private knowledge took information. We're trying to determine who had motive and access." Isabella's fingers tightened around her scarf for a moment. A tiny, human tremor. "You were here for years," she said quietly. "Julian was not. That does not make him a thief. It makes him complicated." "Who else might know about a hidden compartment?" Jack asked. She glanced away for a beat, not avoidance. "Memory. My father used to whisper of ledgers and unpaid promises. Men keep records for leverage. Sometimes they hide them where only vanity is revealed." She looked back. Your brother spent a lot of time in the library when he visited. He'd listen. He'd learn. Ava filed that away. You still have one of Mr. Dubois's old keys, she said. We found it in your bag. Isabella's fingers stilled. He refused to give it back when we divorced. I kept it as a symbol of the life that used to belong to me. Did you use it recently? Jack asked. No, she did not sound like she was lying. She sounded like someone tired of repeating a truth that implied something darker. But I admit, keys have a way of activating old doors in people's minds. Jack watched her, then shifted. Where were you between 10 and midnight the night of the theft? At a friend's. She will confirm. Her voice was flat. Ask her. Ava let it rest. We will. When Isabella left, they felt the air tighten, like pressure before rain. Ava closed her notebook slowly. She's honest about some things and defensive about others. That's not proof. No, Jack said. But it adds weight to the idea that family stories are in play. People who carry old grudges or old knowledge are dangerous because they don't always know what they hold. They moved on to the broker's office where Lewis claimed he'd met. His timeline did not match his earlier versions. Under pressure, his memory snapped and shifted in small increments. He'd been seen near a back stairwell at 10:20 by a junior curator who'd been clearing the hall. He'd said he was on a call. That call, according to the voicemail, was heated about ownership, but the curator had a different recollection. Lewis had appeared distracted, glancing toward the private wing more than once. Jack watched the man in front of him, the chip in the coat, the pride in posture, anger barely under control. You admitted to panicking about a proposal, Jack said. You lied about the time. Why? Lewis rubbed his temple. Because if I told the truth, that I snuck away to speak to a broker, Charles would have seen it as betrayal. I tried to salvage our company. That's all. Jack's eyes were steady. Salvaging a company and planting a ledger are different skill sets. But when people panic about money, they make messy choices. We'll verify your broker meeting. Outside, the late sun slipped down behind buildings, and the museum walls cooled. Whiskey patted through the rooms like a slow inspector, nose to the floor. He stopped at the coat room, sat, and stared at one coat longer than the others. He nudged it once and backed up, then barked soft, the kind of alert that was not alarm but insistence. Ava lifted the coat. It was Julian's. On the sleeve, near the cuff, the ink smudge showed more clearly in the lamplight. Under magnification earlier, they'd seen fibers with crude traces of the ledger's distinctive ink. But now, in the quiet lamps, Ava noticed something else. A tiny stitch at the hem, a repair barely visible unless you were very close. It matched the embroidery Mireille had noted in the cafe footage, the same handwork detail. Julian's coat has been repaired recently, Ava said, by someone who knows how to hide a mark. Jack's mouth thinned. And the stitch matches the cafe frame. So the coat at the terminal and the coat in this room are the same, or someone copied it. They checked the lining pockets again. This time, in a small, almost unseen inner pocket, Jack found a scrap folded in a slip of wax paper. Not the ledger paper, something thinner, with a faint printed logo. A small antiquarian restorer's mark. The kind of mark a conservator might use when cataloging restoration work. Ava's eyes lit for a moment. A restorer's tag. Marie is an art restorer. They thought of Marie's jittery hands, the way she'd been careful with words. Had someone used her profession to get close? Or had Marie been used because she worked with documents and fabrics? Could be either. A knock came at the study door. Mireille appeared, cheeks flushed from hurrying. We pulled a partial audio from the backup tapes, she said. Not much, but there's a soft voice. It says, the inner latch, you know, the scratch. Then it cuts. The quality is poor, but it sounds like Julian's pattern of speech. Calm. Informative. Jack's jaw moved. That's the phrasing he used before. He knew the latch existed. He mentioned it before any of us knew. Ava closed her eyes for a beat. We're circling the same few facts. Knowledge of the safe, access, deleted calls, the coat with ink and repair marks, the cafe terminal tie-in. The ledger fragment, the planted chip, the evidence pointing at Marie. A frame. Someone wanted everyone to look in the wrong direction. Jack's voice was low. And someone tried to use Marie's profession as cover or bait. He looked at the hallway where the family photos hung. Cypher knocked one photo earlier that didn't show Julian. Now we find evidence suggesting he was physically connected to the ledger in some way. Either there's a conspiracy or a carefully staged single-man job with a performer. Ava's lips curved half a smile. Performance is a good word for Julian. He plays roles well. Jack gave nothing away. He cataloged details in his head. The ring tan, the deleted logs, the scratch description, the cafe silhouette, the repair stitch, the restorer's tag. Patterns were maps if you could read them. Outside, the evening deepened. A waiter walked by holding a tray of coffee cups, humming under his breath. The museum settled into the hush of closing hour. Charles paced in his study with hands behind his back, the slow walk of someone who needs to move to think. Jack put his hand on the small of Ava's back as they crossed the hall, the motion small and practical, then stepped toward the study where Charles waited. Ava followed, quiet steps on marble. Inside, Charles looked up. There were lines on his face that hadn't been there before. He said, voice soft, "You think it was one of us?" Jack's response was calm, precise. "We think someone who knew the house very well, who knew the crown's secret and how to mask a theft, orchestrated a scene. That person wanted the ledger gone and wanted to look helpful while doing it." Charles's brow furrowed. "Julian?" Jack's eyes flicked once to the door where Julian's footsteps had disappeared hours before. "He's a suspect. So are others. We're following the facts." A pause, then Charles's whisper. "People like to hide behind generosity. They do good in daylight and steal in the dark." Ava considered that. "People steal what crowns hide," she said softly, not looking at anyone in particular. Whiskey rested his head on his paws. Cypher perched on the windowsill and, for once, vocalized a soft, almost conversational purr. The cat's attention felt like another presence leaning in. Jack folded his hands. "We'll test the repair thread. We'll confirm the restorer's shop. We'll pull the apartment lease again. And we'll check Julian's alibi one more time." Ava added, "And we keep Marie safe while we trace this. Whoever framed her might try again." Charles nodded, thin with worry. The house seemed to hold its breath, willing the detectives to move faster and quieter than the thieves who had already outrun them. Jack looked at the family portrait wall, then at Ava. "We're getting closer. The pattern's clearer." She tilted her head. "When you see the pattern, you can predict the next move." He gave the smallest nod. "Then we stop them before they erase anything else." They left the study together, steady, two people moving in a practiced rhythm toward the threads that would tie the case together. The house felt smaller after dark, as if the shadows had learned to gather where people least expected them. The staff moved with hushed efficiency, folding napkins, stowing film canisters, pretending routine while the detectives peeled at the edges of a family wound. Jack started the evening by replaying the cafe terminal footage again with Mireille. The silhouette sleeve had a distinct embroidery, a small looping motif near the cuff. It was the same stitch found on Julian's coat. Not conclusive, but getting the detail right mattered. Mireille enhanced the frame slowly until the light revealed a sliver of a tag sewn inside the lining. A conservator's mark. The same tiny printed logo Ava had found in the inner pocket earlier. Ava, meanwhile, worked through phone metadata in a quiet corner of the library. She traced the scrubbed logs and pulled timestamps until time hiccuped into something human again. The public terminal had been used, yes, but it had synced to a cloud account that had matched a recent apartment lease. One Julian had never mentioned until yesterday, a short-stay flat near Montparnasse under the name of a shell company that, after a quick cross-check, linked back to a consulting firm Julian had registered months ago. He'd told them he traveled for work. He hadn't mentioned booking a nearby flat during the week of the gala. Jack let the facts sit between them like coals, warm, dangerous. They decided to visit the short-stay flat in the late evening. The building was nondescript, a thin row of windows and dim entry lights. Rain had begun again, delicate and constant, making the pavement shine. A concierge at the ground floor remembered giving keys to a man who matched Julian's description. The cleaner who came the morning after described a neat apartment, minimalist, with one small oddity. A travel envelope in the trash with stamps from an antique paper dealer and a receipt from a small restoration workshop in the Marais. Jack and Ava exchanged the look they shared when two pieces fit. "The restorer," Ava murmured. They found the workshop at a narrow corner street. A bell chimed when they entered. The place smelled like varnish and old paper. The owner, a woman with careful hands and ink-stained thumbs, greeted them with polite curiosity. "Yes, we did a consultation," she said when Jack asked. The ledger was mentioned by a client. Someone wanted pages stabilized, not digitized. He paid in cash and left quickly. He was nervous, but he knew what he wanted done. He asked for discretion. Ava's voice was quiet. "Can you describe him?" Short hair, coat with a small motif at the cuff. He had an old ring tan, like someone who recently removed a ring. He came at night with a case. He said it had been in his family and it was time to fix things. He kept saying, "Fix." The owner's fingers folded around a cup. After he left, I worried. The ledger is important to families. We keep things safe. They asked for receipts. The owner hesitated, then produced a small torn scrap with the conservator's mark and a penciled note. A date, a time, and the initials C.D. Charles Du Bois. The penciled note had a second line, "Review before audit." The handwriting matched the catalog page Ava had found earlier. Julian had been at the restorers. He had arranged stabilization for ledger pages.